August 16, 1977. Elvis Presley didn't die from a failing heart. He died from isolation inside a golden prison he built with his own hands. 15 people on his payroll. Breakfast served at midnight. A bedroom where sunlight never entered. This is the true story of Graceland, where the king of rock and roll had everything except the one thing that matters most: honest human connection. Before we begin, I want to be clear about something. This isn't about sensationalism or disrespecting Elvis or his family. This story matters because understanding what happened to Elvis can help us recognize these patterns in our own lives and in the lives of people we care about. Isolation destroys, whether you live in a mansion or an apartment. Elvis's story is a warning we all need to hear. Let's start. Chapter 1. The experiment begins. When Elvis Presley purchased Graceland in March 1957, he was searching for a sanctuary. What he built was the opposite. From this point forward, his life became a bizarre experiment in sensory deprivation, reversed time, and emotional imprisonment. Here's what most people don't know. Elvis didn't just live differently at Graceland. He lived in a completely alternate reality. While you and I wake up with the sun, eat lunch at noon, and sleep at night, Elvis did the exact opposite. He slept when Memphis went to work. He woke up when Memphis went to bed. He ate breakfast at sunset. Think about that for a second. Imagine living your entire life on the opposite schedule from the rest of humanity. What would that do to your mind? What would that do to your sense of connection to the world? Former cook Mary Jenkins worked at Graceland for years. She described arriving in the late afternoon to prepare what Elvis called breakfast: bacon burned to a crisp, eggs drowning in butter, sausage, biscuits with gravy. The same meal, every single day, for years. Why? Because when your entire life is chaos and pressure and constant change, sometimes the only control you have left is eating the same breakfast every day. Have you ever done that? Held on to one small routine because everything else felt like it was spinning out of control? That was Elvis's reality, but the food was just the beginning of Graceland's strangeness. Elvis's bedroom was designed like a sensory deprivation chamber. Blackout curtains so thick that noon looked like midnight. Air conditioning set so cold you could see your breath. Television playing 24 hours a day. Books on spirituality stacked everywhere. Elvis searching desperately for answers to questions he couldn't even articulate. The mansion's famous music gates weren't just decorative. They were the last line of defense between Elvis and a world that wouldn't leave him alone. Fans gathered outside those gates at all hours. Some waited for days, sleeping on the sidewalk, hoping for one glimpse of their idol. Can you imagine that? Never being able to walk outside your own home without causing a scene, never going to a grocery store, never going to a movie theater during normal hours, never having a simple conversation with a stranger who just sees you as a person instead of a commodity. That's what fame did to Elvis, and Graceland was his response. Build the walls higher, make the gates stronger, control every variable. But here's the cruel irony. The more he tried to protect himself from isolation, the more isolated he became. Inside those walls, Elvis surrounded himself with the Memphis Mafia, 5 to 15 men at any given time. Friends, relatives, employees, all on his payroll, all dependent on him financially, and that financial dependency poisoned every single relationship. Let me ask you something. If your best friend paid your mortgage, bought your car, and gave you your paycheck, how honest could you really be with them? If disagreeing with them meant losing your home, your income, your entire way of life, would you risk it? That's the trap the Memphis Mafia lived in. They loved Elvis, many of them genuinely did, but they also needed him, and need corrupts honesty. When Elvis's mother Gladys died in August 1958, something fundamental broke inside him. The one person who loved him without needing anything from him was gone. From that point forward, Graceland wasn't a family home anymore. It became a palace where the king was surrounded by subjects, not equals. Chapter 2. The Price of Loyalty. Let's talk about what it really meant to be part of Elvis's inner circle. Because from the outside it looked like paradise. Free cars, beautiful homes, constant parties, access to one of the most famous men in the world. But here's what the outside world didn't see. Joe Esposito managed Elvis's daily logistics, travel, scheduling, coordination with the outside world. According to his own accounts, he was indispensable. And that indispensability came with a price, constant pressure to keep Elvis happy no matter what. Red West and Sonny West were Elvis's former high school friends. They started as bodyguards, but became something more complicated. According to their later interviews, they witnessed incredible generosity. Elvis buying cars for complete strangers, paying medical bills for employees' families, acts of spontaneous kindness that would make you cry. But they also witnessed the other side. The frustration, the mood swings, the decisions that worried them but that they felt powerless to challenge. And when they finally did express concerns, when they finally tried to speak difficult truths, they were fired in 1976. Think about that. Your oldest friends, people who knew you before the fame, and even they couldn't tell you the truth without losing everything. Jerry Schilling described feeling torn between genuine friendship and economic survival. In his memoir, he talked about moments when he wanted to challenge Elvis's choices but held back, knowing that one wrong word could mean exclusion, not just from a job, but from a family, from meaning, from purpose. Have you ever been in a friendship or relationship where you couldn't be fully honest? Where you had to manage someone else's emotions at the expense of your own truth? That's exhausting, isn't it? Now imagine living that way for 10, 15, 20 years. That was life in the Memphis Mafia. The daily routine reflected Elvis's nocturnal schedule. The men would arrive at Graceland in the late afternoon, then wait, sometimes for hours, waiting for Elvis to wake up, waiting for the king to decide what the evening would bring. Once Elvis emerged, usually between 4 and 8 p.m., the night would begin. Movies in the screening room, football games under floodlights at 2 a.m., philosophical discussions about spirituality and reincarnation that lasted until dawn. Elvis searching for meaning in a life that had given him everything except purpose. Lamar Fike later described these conversations. Elvis would discuss metaphysics, religion, consciousness. He read hundreds of books on these topics, but according to Fike, genuine debate was almost impossible because everyone in the room depended on Elvis for their livelihood. If Elvis proposed an idea, the room agreed. If Elvis changed his mind, the room changed with him. That's what an echo chamber does to a person. It makes you believe your ideas are always right because you never hear genuine opposition. And when you never hear opposition, you stop growing, you stop learning. You become frozen in whatever version of yourself exists at that moment. The financial generosity was real and legendary. Elvis regularly bought cars, houses, jewelry for his inner circle. Billy Smith, Elvis's cousin, later recalled receiving numerous gifts beyond his salary. And that generosity created genuine gratitude. But it also created golden handcuffs. How do you leave a situation like that? How do you walk away from financial security, from luxury, from access to one of the most famous people in the world? Even when you know deep down that something's wrong, even when you watch someone you love making choices that scare you, how do you risk everything to speak up? Most people couldn't. Most people didn't. And that's not a moral failing. That's just human nature when you're trapped between love and survival. Mary Jenkins and Nancy Rooks worked as cook and maid, respectively. According to their accounts, they saw both Elvis's kindness and his profound loneliness. Nancy described finding Elvis alone at 3, 4 in the morning, unable to sleep, reading or watching television, wrestling with thoughts he couldn't share. Here's what I want you to understand. Elvis was surrounded by people every single day and was still completely alone. That's the paradox of his existence at Graceland. Constant companionship that provided zero genuine connection. Linda Thompson dated Elvis from 1972 to 1976. According to her accounts, she became as much caretaker as girlfriend, watching over his health, trying to navigate the politics of the Memphis Mafia, who sometimes viewed her concerns as threatening their access to Elvis. Can you imagine trying to have a relationship in that environment? Trying to express legitimate concerns about someone you love while knowing that 15 other people have a financial interest in maintaining the status quo? That's an impossible situation. Here's the lesson. Genuine relationships require equality. When one person holds all the power, all the money, all the control, real friendship becomes almost impossible. Not because anyone's evil, but because the structure itself corrupts honesty. First CTA, 10 seconds. If this is changing how you see fame and isolation, hit subscribe right now. This is The Man Behind the King, and we're not done yet. Chapter 3, Living in Reverse. Let's talk about what daily life actually looked like at Graceland, because the schedule itself was a form of psychological warfare, even though nobody intended it that way. Elvis struggled with severe insomnia throughout his adult life. His mind wouldn't stop. Racing thoughts about his career, his purpose, his mortality. Sleep became increasingly difficult, so he created an environment that eliminated the normal cues that help humans maintain healthy sleep patterns. The blackout curtains meant his bedroom existed in permanent darkness. No morning light to wake him, no evening sunset to signal bedtime. Just artificial darkness controlled by his choice, not nature's rhythm. While Elvis slept from 8 a.m. to 4 p.m., Graceland operated in suspended animation. Everyone whispered. Staff moved quietly. The entire estate held its breath, waiting for the king to wake. Think about what that does to your body over time. Your circadian rhythm completely destroyed. Your connection to the natural world severed. Living in a bubble where time itself bends to your preferences. It sounds like ultimate freedom, doesn't it? But it's actually another form of prison. When Elvis finally emerged, the elaborate grooming routine would begin. Hours in the bathroom, dyeing his naturally light brown hair black, styling it perfectly, meticulous attention to appearance despite rarely leaving the property. Why? Because controlling his appearance was one of the few things he could still control. Have you ever fixated on something small when everything else felt chaotic? That's what Elvis was doing. The hair, the clothes, the specific breakfast foods. These were anchors in a life that had lost all normal reference points. After breakfast at sunset, the evening's activities would begin. Many nights involved watching movies in Graceland's screening room. Elvis was passionate about film and studied performances intensely. According to Jerry Schilling, Elvis would watch the same movie multiple times if it moved him, analyzing technique, absorbing lessons. These screenings could last until 2 or 3 in the morning. Then maybe a football game on the lawn under floodlights at 3 a.m. Or racquetball for hours, Elvis pushing his declining body to prove he was still capable, still athletic, still the young man he used to be. Billy Smith described Elvis's determination during these games. Even as his health declined, even as his body struggled, Elvis refused to accept limitations, because accepting physical limitations meant accepting mortality, and Elvis wasn't ready to do that. Reading consumed many hours at Graceland. Elvis's bedroom and office contained hundreds of books on spirituality, metaphysics, religion. Former hairstylist Larry Geller shared Elvis's spiritual interests and described hours-long conversations about consciousness, purpose, the meaning of life. Elvis was desperately searching for answers. Why was he given these extraordinary gifts? What was he supposed to do with them? Why did success feel so empty? These are profound questions that deserve deep exploration, but exploring them in an echo chamber where nobody challenges your conclusions doesn't lead to wisdom. It leads to reinforcement of whatever you already believe. Music, surprisingly, played less of a role in Graceland's daily life than you'd expect. Elvis rarely played piano or guitar at home during his later years. Linda Thompson noted that Elvis seemed to separate his musical identity from his home life. Graceland was supposed to be an escape from being Elvis Presley the performer, but when Elvis did engage with music at home, it was deeply meaningful. Late-night gospel sessions, singing harmony with the Memphis Mafia. Charlie Hodge described these moments as when Elvis seemed most at peace, connecting to the spiritual music of his childhood. The midnight meals became legendary. Full dinners at 2 or 3 in the morning. Fried chicken, mashed potatoes, gravy, corn, green beans, multiple desserts. The kitchen staff remained on call 24 hours, ready to prepare whatever Elvis wanted, whenever he wanted it. These feasts revealed Elvis's complicated relationship with food. According to multiple observers, he used food for emotional comfort, eating to soothe feelings that companionship and success couldn't touch. Mary Jenkins watched Elvis's weight fluctuate dramatically, cycling between extreme diets before performances and periods of unrestricted eating. Have you ever used food that way? Eaten not because you were hungry, but because you were lonely or sad or anxious? Most of us have. For Elvis, that pattern played out on an extreme scale because he had unlimited access and nobody willing to set boundaries. Shopping expeditions happened at midnight. Elvis would decide he wanted to buy things, and stores would open specially for him. Car dealerships, jewelry stores, clothing shops at 2 a.m. Elvis buying impulsively and generously for everyone with him. But here's the saddest part of Graceland's daily rhythm: the loneliness. Elvis would often dismiss everyone late at night, then sit alone reading, watching television, or simply thinking. Linda Thompson described finding him alone at 4 or 5 in the morning, unable to sleep despite exhaustion, wrestling with thoughts he couldn't share even with his closest companions. Ginger Alden, Elvis's girlfriend at the time of his death, recalled similar scenes. Elvis awake at dawn while everyone else slept, isolated by circumstances of his own creation, yet unable to imagine living any other way. That's the trap. Once you've built walls that high, once you've separated yourself that completely from normal human experience, how do you get back? How do you return to ordinary life when you've forgotten what ordinary feels like? Chapter 4. The Beautiful Prison. Let me show you how Graceland's physical spaces reflected Elvis's internal prison. The living room, with its 15-foot white sofa and peacock stained glass windows, looked like a magazine spread. Formal, elegant, beautiful. And according to visitors, almost completely unused. More museum than home, a space preserved for an idealized version of domestic life that never actually happened. The dining room held a table that could seat dozens, but Elvis preferred eating informally, alone in his bedroom or at the kitchen counter. The formal dining room stood ready for gatherings that rarely occurred, another symbol of the gap between appearance and reality. The kitchen, by contrast, was where real life happened, where Mary Jenkins prepared countless meals, where Elvis occasionally appeared late at night, seeking human connection with staff who treated him with less ceremony than everyone else. Elvis's bedroom remained off-limits to most people, and remains so today. Even now, as a museum, that space is never shown on public tours. Why? Because it revealed too much. The blackout curtains, the extreme cold, the constant television, the books on spirituality, the desperate searching for meaning. That room was Elvis's most private self, and it stays protected even decades after his death. The basement's jungle room showcased Elvis's playful, eccentric side. Green shag carpet everywhere, Polynesian furniture, a working waterfall. Elvis loved this room's bold aesthetic. He even installed recording equipment there and made music in that unlikely space. But here's what strikes me about the jungle room. It's trying so hard to be different, to be exciting, to be stimulating. And that effort reveals how desperately Elvis was trying to create interest and meaning in an environment that had become emotionally flat. Have you ever redecorated hoping it would change how you felt? That's what Elvis was doing throughout Graceland. Constantly adding new features, new spaces, new entertainment options, trying to design his way out of loneliness, and discovering that it doesn't work. The meditation garden revealed Elvis's spiritual searching. He would sit there late at night seeking peace, seeking connection to something beyond fame and materialism. This became his final resting place, along with his parents and grandmother. The space where he sought meaning became the space where his search ended. As Elvis's health declined in the mid-1970s, Graceland's atmosphere changed. The mansion grew quieter, more somber. Elvis spent increasing time in his bedroom, venturing out less frequently. The rooms that had hosted gatherings stood empty more often. The spaces themselves seemed to reflect Elvis's declining vitality. Here's what Graceland teaches us. You cannot build or buy your way out of isolation. You cannot design a space that substitutes for genuine human connection. Elvis tried. He kept adding, kept modifying, kept searching for the perfect environment. But the perfect environment for human flourishing isn't about architecture or amenities. It's about relationships where you can be vulnerable, where you can receive honest feedback, where you're valued for who you are rather than what you provide. Second CTA, 8 seconds, 1 chapter left. This is The Man Behind the King. Stay with me. Share this if it's resonating. Chapter 5. The Lesson. August 16, 1977. Elvis Presley passed away at Graceland at age 42, according to medical reports, cardiac arrhythmia. But the real cause was everything we've discussed: years of isolation, disrupted sleep patterns, extreme weight fluctuations from disordered eating, and most importantly, an environment where nobody could provide the honest intervention he desperately needed. The tragedy wasn't surprising to people who'd watched it unfold. The isolation, the enabling environment, the inability to receive genuine feedback, all these factors had been building toward this outcome for years. Thousands of fans gathered outside Graceland's gates, grieving for a man they felt they knew despite never having met him. The mansion that had been Elvis's private escape became public in death in a way it never could have been in life. Priscilla Presley made the decision to open Graceland to the public in 1982. Today, over 600,000 people visit annually. They walk through the rooms we've discussed, seeing a preserved version that can only partially convey what life was actually like when Elvis lived there. The tours show the living room, dining room, kitchen, basement, trophy buildings, and meditation garden, but they never show the second floor, never Elvis's bedroom, never the bathroom where he died. Those spaces remain private, a final boundary between the public and the man. This selective presentation raises an important question. What are we choosing to remember, and what are we choosing to forget? The museum emphasizes Elvis's achievements and generosity, while necessarily minimizing the struggles, the dysfunction, the isolation that killed him. I'm not criticizing that choice, I understand it, but I think Elvis's complete story, including the painful parts, might be more valuable than the sanitized version, because the painful parts contain the lessons we need to learn. Here's what Elvis's story teaches us. First, success without genuine human connection is hollow. Elvis had wealth, fame, talent, and achievement, and he died lonely, isolated, and searching for meaning he never found. External success doesn't guarantee internal peace. Second, honest feedback from people who don't depend on you is invaluable. The Memphis Mafia loved Elvis, but their financial dependency made honesty almost impossible. We all need people in our lives who can tell us difficult truths without fear of consequences. Third, isolation, even chosen isolation, exacts a terrible price over time. Elvis built those walls intentionally, trying to protect himself from a demanding world. But those walls eventually imprisoned him. Connection is a human need we cannot design or wealth our way around. Fourth, fame fundamentally changes relationships in ways that are difficult to overcome. When you become that famous, that wealthy, that powerful, every relationship carries an imbalance that corrupts genuine connection. It's not anyone's fault, it's just the structural reality of extreme fame. And finally, being extraordinary doesn't exempt you from being human. Elvis had extraordinary gifts, but he still needed sleep, healthy food, honest relationships, and purpose beyond performance. His extraordinary talent couldn't protect him from ordinary human needs. Modern celebrities have learned different lessons from Elvis's story. Many now employ professional staff, therapists, and managers who maintain boundaries and provide honest feedback. The friend as employee model has fallen out of favor because of how it ended for Elvis. But the fundamental challenges remain. How do you maintain normalcy in abnormal circumstances? How do you trust people when your wealth affects every relationship? How do you find meaning when you've achieved everything society says should make you happy? For Lisa Marie Presley, who inherited Graceland and controlled the estate until her own death in 2023, the mansion represented both inheritance and burden. Growing up in a place that became famous, her childhood home transformed into a public monument, living with the weight of her father's legacy and the knowledge of how his story ended. Graceland stands today as both celebration and warning, a memorial to achievement and a reminder of isolation's cost. The mansion's transformation from home to museum ensures Elvis's story continues reaching new generations. But here's what I want you to take from this. You don't have to be Elvis Presley for these lessons to matter. Maybe you're not famous. Maybe you'll never face the specific challenges fame creates, but isolation affects all of us. The difficulty of maintaining genuine relationships affects all of us. The search for meaning beyond success affects all of us. Have you built walls in your own life? Maybe not literal gates and security, but emotional walls. Do you have people who can tell you difficult truths? Or are all your relationships managed, controlled, filtered through dynamics that prevent real honesty? Are you using success, achievement, or busyness to avoid addressing deeper needs for connection and purpose? Are you designing your environment, managing your schedule, controlling variables, trying to create perfect circumstances while ignoring the reality that perfect circumstances don't exist? Elvis's story is extreme, but it's also universal. We all struggle with these questions. We all balance between protecting ourselves and opening ourselves to genuine connection. We all search for meaning beyond what society says should satisfy us. The difference is that when you or I struggle with these issues, we have the opportunity to course correct, to recognize isolation before it becomes total, to rebuild relationships before they're destroyed, to seek help before it's too late. Elvis didn't have that opportunity. The walls were too high, the isolation too complete, the enabling too entrenched. By the time people tried to intervene, the patterns were too established to break. But you do have that opportunity. Right now, today, this moment. If you're feeling isolated, reach out. If you've built walls, start taking them down. If you've surrounded yourself with people who only agree with you, find someone who'll challenge you. If you've been prioritizing achievement over connection, recalibrate. If you've been searching for meaning in success alone, look elsewhere. Elvis's tragedy doesn't have to be yours. His lessons don't have to be learned through your own suffering. That's why stories like this matter. Not to judge Elvis, not to diminish his achievements, but to learn from his experience so we can live differently. Final CTA and closing, 35 seconds. That's the complete story of Graceland, behind the gates, behind the fame, behind the legend. The human reality of how isolation destroyed one of the most talented people who ever lived. What resonates most with you from Elvis's story? What walls have you built in your own life? I genuinely want to hear your thoughts in the comments. If this documentary gave you a new perspective, subscribe to The Man Behind the King right now. We tell these stories with depth and respect because legends were people first, and their struggles can teach us how to live better. Share this with someone who needs to hear it, someone who's isolated, someone who's successful but empty, someone who's searching for meaning. Thank you for spending this time with me. Take care of yourselves and each other. Remember, connection isn't a luxury, it's a necessity. Don't wait until it's too late to reach out.